Well, to talk about this, we are now reaching out to Michael Chong. He is the Foreign Affairs critic for the Conservative Party, also the Member of Parliament for the riding of Wellington-Halton Hills in Ontario. Mr. Chong, thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
Now, you have already commented on the existence of these overseas so-called police stations from China, 3 apparently in the Greater Toronto area as outlined in that human rights report. And you say they represent an outrageous intrusion of Canadian sovereignty. What do you mean by that?
Well, the only police authorities that should be operating in Canada are ones that have been authorized by Canadian governments. And this is an example of police authorities operating here from a foreign state without any authorization from a Canadian government. And that is what is so outrageous about this. Nobody should be directing our citizens here without the lawful authorities. And these 3 illegal stations and the people operating out of them represent a real violation, a real intrusion into Canadian sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Embassy for the People's Republic of China, they've made comments about these stations to the CBC, and they say that these outposts are staffed by volunteers, not Chinese officials, not Chinese police officers. They also say that they've been set up to help Chinese citizens here in Canada to do things like renew their driver's licenses back in the People's Republic. What do you make of that explanation?
Well, 2 things. First, it doesn't matter whether these individuals are unpaid or paid, whether they're volunteers or they're employees. The fact is that they are presenting themselves as authorities in this country, and that's completely wrong. They are not lawful authorities in this country operating with the authorization of any Canadian government. And so that is the first problem here. The second thing I'd say is that if the authorities in China, if the authorities in Beijing wish to help their citizens here in Canada renew driver's licenses or deal with other administrative matters related to their citizenship or residency back in the People's Republic of China, they should do it properly. And that means that they provide these services out of their embassy or consulates here in Canada through accredited diplomats. That is the proper way to do it. Those individuals working out of the embassy and the missions here in Canada are authorized by the government of Canada to do that work here, instead of setting up these clandestine stations and projecting those authorities without the consent and authorization of the government of Canada. And that is the problem here. And that's why the government of Canada needs to take immediate action to shut down these illegal stations and anyone operating out of them.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you use the word illegal, because the RCMP now says they're investigating. But if these are illegal stations, one wonders what the investigation is. Is it potential acts through these offices that concern you, or acts that you already know have happened?
Well, I think it's clear that for many years now, proxies and agents acting on behalf of Beijing have been intimidating Canadians here on Canadian soil. We've had many firsthand accounts and reports of pro-Hong Kong democracy activists here in Canada, those advocating for minority rights in China, such as Uyghurs, Tibetans, having been intimidated and coerced by proxies and agents here in Canada acting on behalf of Beijing. The news of these 3 new illegal police stations and the individuals operating out of them is part of a broader pattern here that is very worrisome. It's another tool that Beijing can use to try to coerce people into doing what Beijing wants, and even coerce them into going back to China to be prosecuted for something as simple as speaking up in favor of democracy. And we've had many reports of that, and that's why these stations ought to be shut down.
So ought to be shut down, and you are making a call to the government. Just exactly what do you want the Trudeau government to do, and what kind of timeline are you looking at?
Well, we know that there's currently an RCMP criminal investigation taking place about whether or not any criminal code laws have been violated by the establishment of these 3 stations. But there are 3 other things the government can do in addition to that ongoing criminal investigation. The first is they should haul the Chinese ambassador to Canada on the carpet and express their outrage that Beijing has allowed this to happen in Canada, and demand that these be shut down immediately because they're not acting under any lawful Canadian authority. The second thing the government should do is they should instruct the Foreign Affairs Department to review the credentials, the accreditation of all the several hundred diplomats accredited to the Chinese embassy and to the missions, consulates here in Canada, to ensure that no one at the embassy or consulates, is engaged and involved with these 3 illegal police stations. And if it is found out that any accredited diplomat here is involved with the establishment or operation of these 3 illegal police stations, they should have their credentials revoked. And finally, the Immigration Department should review the visa status of any individuals that might be working out of these offices. And if there are people from Beijing, people from Fujian province, where these stations purportedly have been organized from, operating out of these stations, they should have their visas revoked. The government hasn't provided work visas for any individuals working at these stations, and so anybody who came on to Canada under false pretense that they were visiting or for other purposes should have those immigration papers revoked, and they should be deported from Canada. So those are the things that the government should be undertaking, but so far we've not heard anything from the government and only heard something from the RCMP.
Michael Chong, thank you for the time today.
Thank you.